In what's been described as Atlanta, Georgia's worst ever crime spree, Fortune Spencer of Lilesville, North Carolina, murdered his 24-year-old girlfriend, Sharika Little, over a petty argument, then wreaked havoc on the surrounding area. Spencer was in his 20s when he made the fateful decision to end Little's life during her birthday celebration at a Hilton hotel in June of 2020. According to reports, Little went into the parking lot and sat in her car at around 6 p.m. after arguing with Spencer about a phone charger. A short while later, surveillance cameras captured footage of Spencer calmly approaching Little's car on foot and shooting her in the head through the window. He then walked into the streets where he attempted to carjack an SUV and shot the owner when they resisted, then carjacked a different vehicle occupied by a grandmother and her young granddaughter, who were seen frantically running away from their stolen car. Once inside the vehicle, Spencer rammed it into multiple parked cars. He then abandoned the stolen car and fled on foot to a nearby intersection, where he attempted to carjack an SUV. The driver sped off, causing Spencer to fall in the street, and he made one last-ditch effort to commandeer another vehicle by clinging to the side of it. He was unsuccessful and was left lying in the roadway with injuries after the drivers sped away. A jury found Spencer guilty of all 17 felonies and 5 misdemeanors that he was charged with, including Little's murder. In early 2025, he was sentenced to life without parole, plus 145 years. Number 26. The murder of G Dollar's Lil Ronnie. 2 Texas men are facing murder charges for the merciless slayings of an up-and-coming rapper and his young child, who was shot dead at a car wash in Forest Hills on March 3, 2025. 30-year-old Ronnie, Lil Ronnie Smith, and his daughter, Armani, were found unresponsive in their bullet-riddled vehicle at Slappy's Express car wash, roughly 30 miles west of Dallas. Officers attempted to perform life-saving measures, but both victims were pronounced dead at the scene. Just days before the murder, Smith had made a heartfelt Instagram post about how his daughter invited her friend to join them for a Donuts with Daddy event because the little girl was upset that her own father couldn't attend. In the caption, Smith adoringly referred to his daughter and her friend as his 2 Lil Valentines, showing that he emphasized the value of kindness right up until his death. 3 days after the double homicide, authorities announced that they were searching for 24-year-old convicted predator Adonis Robinson, who was released from jail just months earlier, and 21-year-old Jacoby Deshawn Russell. According to investigators, the suspects were seen stepping out of a white Kia, approaching the victims on foot and opening fire on Smith's car, which was stationary at the time. The shooters sped away from the scene and evaded initial identification, but were captured within days of being publicly named as suspects in the case. Robinson was captured in Livingston, Texas, on March 6th, and Russell was apprehended in the same area the following day. Records show that Russell is currently in custody on charges of capital murder and assaulting a pregnant woman, while Robinson is also being held in Tarrant County on a capital murder charge. Authorities have yet to reveal a suspected motive for the killings. Number 25. Austin Ice. In April 2023, a California man carried out a campaign of violence across Ventura County, resulted in the death of an innocent high school student. 26-year-old Austin Ice began his crime spree at a Walmart store in Simi Valley, where he stabbed, pepper sprayed, and dragged a people greeter. From there, Ice drove to his parents' home in Camarillo, where he forced his way inside and demanded additional weapons at knife point while armed with a replica gun. He then plowed his vehicle into a group of Westlake High School students who were standing on a sidewalk, killing Wesley Welling and injuring several other teens. Ice initially pleaded not guilty to a spate of crimes, but had an apparent change of heart in February 2025 and pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, multiple counts of attempted first-degree murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and false imprisonment by violence. He's currently awaiting sentencing but is facing 85 years to life in prison and will likely never walk free again. Ice acknowledged the prospect of dying behind bars while he calmly entered his plea, indicating that he had come to terms with his actions and is ready to take responsibility for his wrongdoings. Number 24. Lorent Pion. A 29-year-old Florida man is accused of murdering his girlfriend by purposely throwing her into traffic along Interstate 95, while a horrified construction crew looked on helplessly. Footage captured on December 7th, 2024 appears to show convicted felon Lorent Pion chasing after and battering the victim, 22-year-old Naomi Cittadini, along an entrance ramp in Miami-Dade before he allegedly dragged her into the path of oncoming vehicles. State Department of Transportation workers contacted the authorities about the fighting couple shortly after 6 o'clock in the morning, but by the time police arrived, it was too late to save Cittadini's life and Pion had fled the scene. Witnesses described seeing multiple vehicles swerving around the pier while Pion dragged Cittadini into the road. Pion reportedly began walking away but went back over to Cittadini and pulled her back into the road after he saw her crawling onto the shoulder. According to one worker who saw the violence unfold, Pion repeatedly punched Cittadini, then jumped out of the way just before a sedan struck the victim. The driver stopped a few hundred yards north of where the collision occurred. In the meantime, Pion got back into his SUV and drove off, driving past his girlfriend's lifeless body as he pulled away from the crime scene. An autopsy found that Cittadini died from blunt force injuries due to being struck by a vehicle. In the meantime, police received a tip from a witness who said that Cittadini had been last seen alive with Pion at a gentleman's club in Hallandale. The same witness also described seeing Pion covered in blood after Cittadini was killed. This individual reportedly confronted Pion, who claimed he had struck a median. Just a few months before the incident, Pion had been arrested for battering Cittadini on Miami Beach. The judge overseeing the case had imposed a stay-away order and Pion was supposedly on house arrest when Cittadini was killed. Investigators tracked his ankle monitor to an apartment complex and took him into custody after a brief pursuit, which ended after Pion struck multiple other vehicles. Pion is reportedly being held without bail at the Broward County Jail, while the case plays out in court. Number 23. Emmetson Zeah. A Maryland teen with an alarming list of priors now stands accused in a double homicide that resulted in the deaths of 2 other youths at the mall in Columbia. 18-year-old Emmetson Zeah is facing charges in connection with this and a previous shooting which occurred on Valentine's Day. According to prosecutors, Zeah shot at someone along a Columbia roadside in mid-February. The victim in the first shooting survived, resulting in an attempted murder charge against Zeah, who was on home monitoring when he allegedly shot Michael Robertson and Blake McCrae just weeks later. Robertson, a high school sophomore, was fatally struck in the mall's parking lot shortly before 6 o'clock p.m. on March 1st, while McCrae, a high school freshman, succumbed to his injuries at a trauma center several days after the shooting. Despite the level of violence involved in the crime, the mall did not go into lockdown and operations continued as usual. Authorities say that Zeah violated his home monitoring agreement the day before the double homicide, but they have yet to explain why no action was taken before the carnage took place. During a search of the suspect's home, police found the clothing Zeah was wearing during the shooting, along with the gun that they believe the murders were committed with. His alleged motive for the crime has yet to be revealed, but authorities have clarified that they believe the killings were targeted and that members of the public are not in any danger at this time. Zeah is currently being held without bail on 2 counts of first-degree murder, as well as an attempted murder charge stemming from the prior shooting 2 weeks earlier. Speaking with local station WJZ, Columbia residents said that they generally feel safe in the area, which one local described as statistically a lot better than other nearby regions. Number 22. Travis Ward. One innocent Vancouver, Washington resident was killed and 2 others were injured at the hands of 32-year-old Travis L. Ward, who was accused of opening fire on civilians at a shopping mall during a Halloween event in 2024. Gunfire broke out in the Vancouver Mall's food court shortly before 7:30 p.m. when a gunman dressed in all black and donning Joker mask began shooting indiscriminately into the crowd. All signs point toward the incident being premeditated and planned with maximum carnage in mind, especially considering the fact that families were gathered for the mall's Halloween party when the shooting occurred. Witnesses described complete chaos breaking out amid at least a half-dozen gunshots. Terrified civilians could be heard screaming as they ran into stores and hid behind shelves of merchandise. One local mother, Kiana Mills, later told news station KPTV that her son was doing flips in a harness when the shooting began. She immediately focused all her attention on getting her son out of the harness and out of harm's way. Thanks to her vigilant response, both she and her son survived without injury. Another witness, Raymond McConnell, was at the mall with his wife and daughter when he saw the shooter at a perilously close distance. He said he locked eyes with his wife and pointed toward an exit, at which point the couple wasted no time scooping up their daughter and running for cover, along with hundreds of others who were in the area at the time. In the meantime, employees who were not in close proximity to the shooter overheard the gunshots and began locking up stores. Several families told reporters that it would be a long time before they would feel safe re-entering a shopping mall due to lingering trauma and fears for their safety, even though they escaped the shooting physically unscathed. 26-year-old James Perez was pronounced dead at the scene, and the two surviving gunshot victims, Brandon Lehrer and Daniel Martin, were treated for non-life-threatening injuries. Ward, who was at the mall with his unsuspecting mother and girlfriend prior to the shooting, fled the scene and was captured 3 days later. He remains in custody without bail on suspicion of first-degree murder, 2 counts of first-degree assault, and 1 count of unlawful possession of a firearm. Number 21. Gregory Thomas-Dockery. A Milwaukee man is facing an attempted homicide case after having the case previously dismissed twice by prosecutors. The incidents relating to the charges consist of 3 gas station shootings that occurred in June of 2023. 18-year-old Gregory Thomas-Dockery is now accused for the 3rd time of being involved in all 3 shootings, as well as a 4th shooting, which he was not previously charged with. According to prosecutors, the shootings occurred over a month-long period, with the first incident taking place on June 5th, 2023. A man was injured but survived after being hit with several of the 30 gunshots that were fired. Thomas-Dockery and another man allegedly admitted to being involved in the shooting in a social media video that was posted after the incident. He was connected to another shooting which occurred just 2 days later. On June 10th, just 5 days after the first shooting, a 3rd shooting occurred, leaving one victim incredibly lucky to survive after being shot 12 times. The 4th shooting happened in early July, with yet another victim surviving after undergoing emergency surgery for multiple bullet wounds. Thomas-Dockery is facing 3 counts of attempted first-degree intentional homicide and at least 1 count of first-degree recklessly endangering safety. He pleaded not guilty to all counts and the case is ongoing. Number 20. Catfight at Laguardia. Complete chaos broke out at LaGuardia Airport in Queens, New York, on an otherwise ordinary Sunday during the late summer of 2020, when 2 women got into a catfight on a jet bridge. Fists began to fly seemingly out of nowhere as the women prepared to board an Atlanta-bound flight, prompting an onlooker to film a viral 24-second video. In the footage, the brawling parties could be seen fighting on the floor while an onlooker, and presumably a relative, yelled to "Come get Aaliyah," because she was fighting. A woman who was talking on her cell phone walked into the frame and yelled at one of the women, "Aaliyah!" to stop as she approached the fight in progress. Moments before the video ended, a man rushed past bystanders and airline employees in an apparent attempt to break the women up. Meanwhile, a staff member looked on while another employee called for help. A Delta Airlines spokesperson later revealed that the flight was delayed due to a customer issue, but the employee declined to go into detail about the nature of the problem or whether it had anything to do with the altercation. Instead of answering questions, the representative directed the media to airport authorities for additional information. The passenger who filmed the footage, Destiny Davis, told Storyful that there was little intervention until police showed up at the gate, and it reportedly took officers a while to get there. Davis further explained that the combatants appeared to either be sisters or cousins, in other words, relatives of some sort, and that the women were led off the jet bridge in a peaceful manner, but that the rest of the travelers had to wait 30 to 40 minutes for the authorities to retrieve the suspect's luggage. Number 19. Kwaimain, Redmon, Ronzel, Dixie, and Meko Brown Jr. A trio of Virginia men were recently sentenced to life in federal prison for their roles in a robbery and murder spree over an 11-month period started in January 2017. According to U.S. prosecutors, 31-year-old Ronzel Dizzy, aka Bone or Busy, 30-year-old Kwaimain Shidi Redmond or Kwa, and 26-year-old Meko Montez Brown Jr., aka Gangster or 9-Ball, carried out 7 shootings, including 5 murders, 4 commercial robberies, 3 drug robberies, 3 car thefts, and 2 high-speed police pursuits during their campaign of violence. The men were reportedly known to carry handguns and an Uzi while victimizing cell phone stores, gas stations or convenience stores, and rival drug dealers. In addition to the acts of violence they carried out in public, they also targeted private residences. In early 2025, all 3 suspects were convicted of multiple federal crimes, including conspiracy to interfere with interstate commerce by robbery, multiple counts of interference with commerce by robbery, numerous gun-related charges, and use of a firearm resulted in death. Dixie was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms plus 30 years, while Redmon and Brown were sentenced to life plus 57 and 54 years respectively. There's no parole in the federal prison system, which means that they will never see freedom again. Number 18. George Manning. 2 innocent Kansas City, Missouri residents were killed as the result of one man's actions during a deadly crime spree on February 27, 2025. According to reports, George C. Manning fatally shot his first victim, 33-year-old Catherine Katie Bjorklund, at a car wash, despite having no known relationship or previous connections to the woman. Just minutes later, and a handful of blocks away, the gunman killed a 7th grader named Giuliani Calderon, who was apparently known to Manning, although the nature of their relationship is unclear. Manning is also accused of shooting 34-year-old Mercedes Ontiveros, who he also reportedly had a previous relationship with. Ontiveros survived, but Manning became a casualty of his own violence and was fatally shot by police officers in Riverside the following morning. Speaking with local station KSHB, Katie Bjorklund's mother, Tony, said that she planned to meet with local law enforcement to learn what she can about her daughter's murder, but that she has questions which will never be answered since the killer himself is no longer alive. Tony also expressed disbelief that someone would be capable of killing Katie, who she described as a drama-free and peaceful person who always wanted everyone to get along. Number 70. Jordan Daniel Pierce. A contentious child custody battle reared its ugly head even after measures were taken to ensure the safe exchange of one former Virginia couple's 3 kids outside a Vinton police station. 45-year-old Jordan Daniel Pierce is accused of fatally shooting his son's mother's fiancé and the man's friend during what was supposed to be a safe drop exchange of the children on Sunday, March 2nd, 2025. Officers responded to the scene outside the town's municipal building, which is where the police station is located, shortly before 5:15 p.m. The victims, 31-year-old Jeffrey Allen Catron and 29-year-old Brian Christian Sled, were pronounced dead at the scene. According to court documents, Pierce fired 13 rounds at the victims while dropping the 3 boys off with their mother at the designated safe zone spot behind the building. The shooting occurred in front of the children, their mother, and 2 firefighters, and Pierce was still at the scene when officers arrived. Authorities have not revealed what led up to the shooting and have declined to go into detail about the specific circumstances surrounding the former couple's custody arrangement, but the signs point toward the suspect being disgruntled with the situation in one way or another. Pierce is being held at the Roanoke County Jail without bond on 2 counts of second-degree murder and 2 counts of use of a firearm in commission of a felony. Records show that he pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor attempted assault and battery charge in 2022, although the circumstances of that case are also unclear. Number 16. The murder of Cassandra Cassidy. In an unexpected tragedy that shook the typically rough-and-tumble city of Las Vegas to its core, a high schooler was accused of senselessly killing a Good Samaritan in a drive-by shooting in April of 2015. 24-year-old addiction recovery worker and fashion design student Cassandra Cassidy had stopped to help 2 women who had approached her in the street and told her they were scared of some men in a car. As she spoke with the women, a young man shot at them from a passing car while another man opened fire while approaching the trio on foot. Cassidy was not believed to be the intended target of the shooting. She was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time and was trying to help when she paid for it with her life. The women who flagged Cassidy down told investigators that they had simply hoped to use her cell phone to call for help and were ruled out as suspects in the crime. Based on the investigation's findings, authorities charged a teenager, Christopher Brown, and a 21-year-old suspect, Michael D'Angelo Scott, with Cassidy's murder. According to prosecutors, Brown was the suspect who approached the group on foot, while Scott shot at the women from the passing car. Curiously, updates on the defendant's court proceedings became scarce after the case initially made national news headlines. Records show that Scott was paroled in 2023 after serving part of a 20-year sentence for voluntary manslaughter with a deadly weapon enhancement. Brown, who is now 25 years old and was tried as an adult despite his young age at the time of Cassidy's death, is serving an 18 to 45-year sentence at High Desert State Prison for second-degree murder with a deadly weapon enhancement. Number 15. The murder of Darin Marquese Hall. 32-year-old Darin Marquese Hall of Birmingham, Alabama, was an innocent bystander who was killed in the crossfire during a shooting at a shopping mall food court in late February of 2025. The incident happened at the Western Hills Mall in Fairfield, where at least 2 other fatal shootings have occurred since 2018. According to police, gunfire rang out at around 5:00 p.m. on a Sunday evening. There were around a dozen people in the food court, most of whom were waiting in line to order food when an altercation broke out between 3 individuals. According to witnesses and video evidence, the dispute was between a man on one side of the food court and 2 men who were standing on the opposite side. The man standing by himself reportedly had his hand underneath his shirt and pulled a gun as his 2 adversaries began advancing toward him. Witnesses could be seen ducking for cover beneath tables and running for their lives as the shots were fired, but at least one bystander, an off-duty firefighter, stuck around and attempted to render life-saving aid to Hall, who was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital. A 21-year-old man was also hospitalized with a gunshot wound, but his current condition is unknown. 4 days after the shooting, police announced the arrest of 19-year-old Tavian Jermaine Perry, who remains in custody at the Jefferson County Jail on charges of murder and attempted murder. Number 14. Nicholas Lopardo. People respond to rejection in different ways. One McHenry County, Illinois man is accused of taking his disappointment out on innocent victims in what the authorities have described as a reign of terror and a crime spree unlike anything the local area had previously seen in late March of 2023. According to prosecutors, 27-year-old Nicholas Lopardo left the party after being turned down by a woman, hopped into his Jaguar and shot 4 bullets into the ground before speeding off. He then allegedly shot at 2 police vehicles, both of which were being driven by officers at the time, as well as an SUV belonging to a newspaper delivery woman. Lopardo is also accused of stealing a vehicle and shooting and throwing rocks at several local residents' homes. He was found fit to stand trial after undergoing a mental evaluation and is facing 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder, along with charges for the aggravated discharge of a firearm at an occupied building, possession of a stolen vehicle, possession of a stolen firearm, and being a felon in possession of a firearm. According to the most recent available updates from early March of 2025, the trial is ongoing. Number 13. Edgar Maddison Welch. A man who served prison time for opening fire on a Washington, D.C. pizzeria back in 2016 was shot dead by police in Kannapolis, North Carolina, during a traffic stop in January 2025. 36-year-old Edgar Maddison Welch's spate of troubling run-ins with law enforcement appears to have started around 8 years ago, when he subscribed to a conspiracy theory known as Pizzagate. Fellow conspiracy theorists whom Welch connected with online claimed that the Comet Ping Pong Pizzeria in Washington, D.C. was involved in a child trafficking ring run by Hillary Clinton. None of this was true, but Welch believed that it was, and he was angry enough about it to drive 6 hours from Salisbury to D.C. He showed up at the pizzeria with an AR-15 style rifle in his possession and fired inside the restaurant. No one was harmed in the shooting, and Welch was sentenced to 4 years behind bars after pleading guilty to federal gun charges. During the more recent traffic stop that ended with Welch dead, the arresting officer recognized Welch from a prior arrest Believing that the man was wanted on a felony warrant for violating probation, the officer attempted to arrest Welch, who reacted by pulling a gun and pointing it at the cop. Both of the two officers who were present at the scene ordered Welch to put down the weapon, but he refused, prompting the officers to shoot at Welch. He was rushed to the hospital where he died from his injuries. News of Welch's crimes seems to conflict with the description of him in a New York Times article as a soft-spoken and polite nature lover, but as his track record indicates, people are not always as they seem, and his seemingly impulsive decision not to comply with law enforcement turned out to be his most regrettable mistake. Number 12. Lamottis Simms Jr. A young Mississippi man recently learned that instead of pursuing a meaningful future, he'll be spending the next 25 years behind bars for a multi-jurisdictional crime spree that went viral. Footage of 20-year-old Lamottis Simms Jr. of Memphis, Tennessee, jumping over high fences near Interstate 55 in DeSoto County quickly captured the internet's attention in 2024. It was also noticed by prosecutors who seemed happy to announce that Simms can now practice his acrobatics behind bars at a Mississippi state prison, where he's now serving a 25-year sentence for his crimes. According to authorities, Simms and another suspect, Sean Brown, were fleeing from law enforcement in a stolen vehicle when one of the men fired multiple shots at the pursuing officers. A 10-hour standoff ensued before the suspects surrendered without incident. In early March of 2025, Simms, who was not the shooter but reportedly played a significant role in the chase, pleaded guilty to attempted possession of stolen property, landing him a quarter-century punishment. He's required to serve at least 13 years behind bars before becoming eligible for parole, which will give him plenty of time to reflect on the actions that made him an overnight internet sensation. Number 11. Francisco Sevilla. A New York City landscaper is facing a murder charge after a money-related dispute with a former colleague ended in the death of a 64-year-old cancer survivor, Juliet Kashidis Singh, who one neighbor described as sickly, was found unresponsive on the front stoop of her Ozone Park, Queens home with an electrical cord around her neck in late February. She had been beaten and strangled to death. This type of horrific violence doesn't go unnoticed for long in a city as densely populated as the Big Apple, and investigators were quick to identify 40-year-old Francisco Sevilla as the accused killer. According to law enforcement, Kashidis Singh and Sevilla worked together in the landscaping business and were entangled in an ongoing dispute over $300 that the victim supposedly owed the accused killer. By the time police arrived at the scene, Sevilla had fled. He still had blood on his hands when he was captured hours later at around 1:00 a.m. Sevilla, a Mexican national who's been in the US for around 2 years, reportedly told investigators that he was under the influence and claimed to have no recollection of the incident that resulted in Kashidis Singh's death. He's being held without bail on a second-degree murder charge as he awaits his next court hearing. Number 10. James Rogers. A retired New York City fire captain has landed on the wrong side of the law after he allegedly beat another man to death after an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting in Bayshore, Queens. 66-year-old James Rogers, who lives in Babylon, Long Island, and served as an FDNY captain for 22 years, is accused of killing 65-year-old Mark Iacono with his bare hands in the parking lot of the Methodist church where the meeting was held. According to authorities, the men were arguing after the gathering when Rogers suddenly took Iacono to the ground. Iacono landed face first, at which point Rogers reportedly smashed the victim's face into the pavement repeatedly. Rogers is also accused of continuing to kick Iacono even after someone pulled him off of the obviously incapacitated man. Iacono was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital less than 10 minutes later, and Rogers is now facing a first-degree manslaughter charge in connection with the incident. The accused killer pleaded not guilty during his arraignment and is scheduled to return to court on March 11th. When contacted by the New York Post, Rogers' attorney declined to go into detail about the dispute beyond mentioning that his client and Iacono had a prior business relationship and were having an argument over a business dispute. The murder of Leashan McBeath. 2 suspects are facing a potential lifetime behind bars for the murder of 21-year-old Leashan McBeath, who was stabbed to death at Charlotte Transit Center in North Carolina in late February of 2025. McBeath was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital after officers found him suffering from multiple stab wounds at an intersection outside the transit center. Several days later, authorities announced the arrest of 20-year-old Sierra Guzman, who is charged with first-degree murder, armed robbery, and conspiracy. She's currently in custody in Mecklenburg County. Guzman's alleged accomplice, 19-year-old Ricky Miller, was already in custody in Union County on unrelated charges when he was named as a person of interest in McBeath's death. In addition to the unrelated case, he also stands accused of first-degree murder, armed robbery, and conspiracy. He's reportedly slated to be extradited to Mecklenburg County, and authorities say that the investigation into the case is ongoing. Law enforcement has also appealed for more information on the case and is encouraging members of the public to come forward and share what they know by contacting Mecklenburg County homicide detectives. The suspect's alleged motive for the crime remains unclear. Number 8. Jamerian Anders. Parade goers in Franklinton, Louisiana, are lucky to be alive after 5 attendees were shot during a Mardi Gras celebration in early March of 2025. The incident, which has been described by law enforcement as gang-related, occurred at around 7:00 p.m. during the Pepe Mardi Gras parade. According to the most recent available updates, 1 victim remains in critical condition, while 2 remain hospitalized in stable but guarded condition. The other 2 victims received treatment for their injuries and have since been released. Police arrested the accused gunman, 18-year-old Jamerian Anders, shortly before midnight on the night of the incident in question. He reportedly implicated himself in the shooting after waiving his Miranda rights and speaking voluntarily with investigators, and was taken into custody on suspicion of 5 counts of attempted first-degree murder. There could be additional arrests in connection with the shooting, according to police, who revealed that this wasn't the only close call that occurred during the parade. Officers also arrested a juvenile who was seen brandishing an AR-15 style rifle during the event. No one was injured in that particular incident, thanks to the swift response of nearby members of law enforcement, who wasted no time springing into action the moment they noticed that the teen suspect was in possession of a weapon. Number 7. Gang-related gun violence in Brussels. Throughout early February, the Belgian capital of Brussels was plagued by violence. Harrowing surveillance footage from one incident showed 2 men in hoodies opening fire outside the entrance of the Clemenceau underground station with Kalashnikov-style rifles just before 6:30 in the morning. In the video, the pair could be seen ascending the stairway and pulling the triggers without warning. Miraculously, no one was injured in the hail of bullets. Authorities are unsure who the suspects were targeting with the barrage of gunfire. After opening fire in the middle of the public, the pair fled back down into the station, resulted in the closure of 2 major metro lines while an hours-long manhunt ensued. According to the most recent available updates, law enforcement was still searching for 2 to 3 suspects whom they believe were involved in that particular incident, which happened amid a noticeable spike in gun-related crimes throughout the city. While no one was harmed during the aforementioned shooting, the recent spate of violence throughout Brussels wasn't without casualties. At least 4 shootings occurred over a week-long period, with 1 person being injured during one of the first 3 shootings, while the 4th shooting claimed a human life. And while terrorism has been ruled out as a likely motive, all 4 shootings are believed to be gang and drug-related. Gun violence isn't necessarily a new phenomenon in Belgium, but 4 shootings in 1 week is reportedly considered a high number. In response to the alarming uptick in life-threatening incidents, the country's government vowed to increase its police presence throughout Brussels. Meanwhile, there appears to be no news of any arrests, indicating that the perpetrators likely remain at large. Number 6. Southwest Philly Shootout. An argument on a southwest Philadelphia street led to a broad daylight shooting on March 21st, 2022, leaving both parties extremely lucky to be alive. Surveillance footage showed 2 men engaged in a heated confrontation on the front steps of a home. In the video, one of the men could be seen backing away while continuing to shout at his adversary. Just when it seemed like the dispute might be cooling off, however, the tensions reached a fever pitch as the men reconvened and continued shouting at one another. Both individuals had their hands in their pockets during the exchange, and they both took their hands out of their pockets and opened fire on one another At almost the exact same moment, one of the men retreated toward the residence while shooting in the other man's direction. He then descended the steps and continued to fire his weapon while his opponent presumably fled the scene. No one was struck by the gunfire, including a bystander who could be seen standing dangerously close to the exchange of bullets in the video. Considered from this angle, the individuals involved in the shooting and those who witnessed it were significantly more fortunate than most Philly residents who found themselves in the path of oncoming gunfire throughout 2022, or at any time for that matter. Roughly a month after the incident occurred, authorities announced the arrest of one of the suspects but did not reveal his name or the nature of any charges he faced in connection with the case. Law enforcement appealed to the public for more information about the incident, indicating that the case was still under investigation at the time. Number 5. Joshua Daniel Felker and Lanie Nicolle Denton. 41-year-old Joshua Daniel Felker and 27-year-old Lanie Nicolle Denton are no strangers to law enforcement, which perhaps makes their most recent arrests in early March of 2025 not altogether surprising. The pair were apprehended in Coos County, Oregon, on suspicion of what authorities described as a months-long crime spree involving armed robbery, menacing, and methamphetamine. The capture comes following an incident during the early morning hours in Coos Bay, where officers came into contact with the victim of an alleged attempted carjacking. A gunshot had been fired during the botched vehicle theft, but no one was injured. By the time police arrived at the scene, Felker and Denton had fled. They were arrested hours later in nearby Bandon on a laundry list of charges, including first-degree robbery, attempted unauthorized use of a vehicle, attempted first-degree assault, menacing, unlawful use of a weapon, felons in possession of a firearm, and more. Prosecutors dropped all but 3 charges against Denton by the time the pair were arraigned 2 days later, while Felker faces even more charges. Authorities say that the suspects began their crime spree in November of 2024 when they were passengers during a traffic stop in which police found meth and multiple guns. The charges relating to that incident were eventually dropped, but Denton and Felker continued to catch cases in the meantime. They were both hit with too many charges to list in both separate incidents and while together, and are currently in custody while awaiting their next court hearing, which is scheduled for March 10th. Number 4. Addicted to money crime spree. In early March of 2025, authorities in York, Pennsylvania announced the arrests of 3 suspects in a cold case homicide and crime spree dating back nearly 6 years. 27-year-old Shandon Michael Garner, 26-year-old Anu Malik Lee Johnson, and 26-year-old Jakeem Woodard are each facing a litany of charges for multiple alleged acts of violence, including the killing of Edward Jamerian Jr., who was found shot to death shortly before midnight on August 22, 2019. Additionally, the suspects are charged with aggravated assault, armed robbery, and burglary. Garner faces a first-degree murder charge as the alleged triggerman in Jarman's death, while Johnson and Woodard are accused of second-degree murder for participating in the robbery gone wrong that claimed the victim's life. This certainly isn't Garner's first run-in with the law. Back in 2021, he was convicted in the shooting death of 20-year-old Tyree Johnson, who was killed along a street in September 2019. Garner pleaded guilty to third-degree murder in that case and was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison, which is considerably less time than he would have faced if he had been found guilty at trial. Garner and his co-defendants in the case of Jarman's murder were all members of a group called ATM, or Addicted to Money, who reportedly fed this so-called addiction by committing robberies. In addition to Jarman's murder, the ATM group is believed to be associated with the attempted murder of another man named James McMillan. It's unclear whether Tyree Johnson's murder is believed to be the handiwork of the group's activities or a separate, isolated incident solely involving Garner, who appears to be the only person convicted in that particular case. Number 3. Bronx broad daylight shooting. In August of 2021, the NYPD put out a notice seeking information about a broad daylight shooting that occurred during the early morning hours in the Bronx. According to news reports, a 32-year-old man was shot multiple times during an argument at an after-hours party on Westchester Avenue. The incident occurred in the borough's Foxhurst section at around 6:17 a.m. Surveillance footage of the shooting showed the victim being chased down a sidewalk by a man in a ripped shirt. The victim was rushed to the hospital with gunshot wounds to the stomach and buttocks. He survived his injuries, but the two suspects involved in the incident remained at large, prompting law enforcement to appeal to the public for help identifying him and tracking him down. It remains unclear whether the men were apprehended, and police did not specify whether the victim was cooperating with investigators. Authorities also failed to reveal whether they believed the parties had any prior connections or if they were believed to be strangers. Today's topic was requested by Sean Delap 8587. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Australian street brawl spirals out of control. A disagreement that began as a street brawl in late 2020 ended in a reckless act of vehicular violence in Darwin, Australia, where the rampaging driver of a Land Cruiser rammed his SUV into a crowded bar. According to news reports, the suspect, 38-year-old Dale Talbot, had been assaulted earlier that evening by 25-year-old Joey Hazelbane, 32-year-old Wade Hunter, and 30-year-old Carla Garling. The trio were accused of kicking, punching and stomping on Talbot to the point where he fell unconscious. Talbot's family later claimed that the assault drove him over the edge and was the motivating factor which caused him to get behind the wheel and speed toward the trio, who were standing in front of the bar when the vehicle plowed through the front entrance at 31 miles per hour. The alleged assailants appeared to avoid being hit and could be seen throwing bar stools at the Land Rover as it rushed up to the building. In May of 2021, Talbot pleaded guilty to 3 charges, including recklessly endangering life. Despite having an extensive criminal record, he was sentenced to just 4 years in prison, with credit for time served and the possibility of parole starting in December 2022. Talbot was also ordered to cover the $10,000 in damages that his actions caused. Hunter, Garling, and Hazelbane were charged with assault for their role in the street fight that occurred prior to the incident, but the outcomes of their cases are unclear. Number 1. Mid-air mayhem. Many people would agree that one of the worst places for violence to occur is on an airplane while traveling at an altitude of tens of thousands of feet. But this didn't stop 2 women from going at it on a Frontier Airlines flight from Philadelphia to Las Vegas in July of 2023. Footage of the brawl shows a flight attendant attempting to separate the warring women while they shouted and physically attacked one another. Even after the women were separated, they continued to yell expletives and throw items at each other, at one point striking an innocent male passenger who happened to be in the path of a flying object. At times, passengers seemed more annoyed than scared and could be heard telling the women to shut up, but the unruly flyers refused to respect the wishes of their more well-behaved fellow travelers, resulting in the captain's decision to make a pit stop in Denver, where the offending parties were removed from the aircraft and presumably ordered to make other travel arrangements, while the women could have potentially faced federal charges for their disruptive mid-flight antics. It remains unclear whether the authorities took legal action against them. Thanks for watching. Would you rather box against a Prime Stallone or a Prime Schwarzenegger, and why? Let us know in the comments section below.